Marcus Rodriguez stepped off the Greyhound bus at the small town station, his weathered duffel bag slung over one shoulder. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. After 12 years serving his country as a Navy SEAL, he was finally coming home to Millbrook, the quiet town where he'd grown up before enlisting at 18. The town looked smaller than he remembered, but then again, everything seemed different after seeing the world through the lens of military service. The main street still had the same old diner, the hardware store, and the barber shop where old men gathered to discuss local politics and weather. Some things, thankfully, never changed. Marcus had returned for his father's funeral, a man who had worked at the local factory for 40 years before retiring. The service had been simple, attended by longtime neighbors and family friends who remembered Marcus as the quiet kid who helped his dad fix cars in their garage. But now, walking through town in civilian clothes, he felt like a stranger in his own hometown. He decided to stop by Murphy's Diner for coffee before heading to his childhood home. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and several heads turned his way. He recognized a few faces from his youth, though they looked older now, weathered by time and routine. Taking a seat at the counter, he ordered black coffee from Sally, the same waitress who had served him milkshakes when he was in high school. "Marcus Rodriguez," she said with a warm smile. "Heard you were coming back for Tom's funeral. So sorry for your loss, honey. Your dad was a good man." "Thank you, Sally." He really was. As he sipped his coffee, Marcus couldn't help but overhear the conversation at the table behind him. 3 men in work clothes were discussing the upcoming Veterans Day ceremony at the town square. Their voices carried a tone of casual disrespect that made his jaw tighten. "Don't know why we make such a big deal about it," one of them said. "Half these guys claiming to be war heroes probably never saw real action anyway." "Yeah," another chimed in. "My cousin's been telling everyone he was Special Forces, but I heard he was just a cook on some base in Germany." The third man laughed. "These days, everyone thinks they're Rambo. Probably got their tattoos at some strip mall parlor to look tough." Marcus kept his eyes forward, focusing on his coffee cup. He'd heard similar comments before, usually from people who had never worn a uniform or understood the weight of service. His own tattoos told stories these men would never comprehend. The trident on his shoulder represented years of grueling training, missions he couldn't discuss, and brothers he'd lost along the way. After finishing his coffee, Marcus walked to the local grocery store to pick up some supplies. The store hadn't changed much since his teenage years. The same narrow aisles, the same squeaky shopping cart wheels, the same hand-written sale signs taped to the shelves. He grabbed basic necessities: coffee, bread, milk, and some canned goods. At the checkout, the young cashier, probably around 19 or 20, looked him up and down with obvious skepticism. Marcus was wearing a simple gray t-shirt, and the edge of his tattoo was visible near his collar. The kid's name tag read, Tyler. "That's a nice tattoo," Tyler said with a smirk. "Let me guess, you're one of those military guys, right? What did you do, sit behind a desk somewhere?" Marcus handed over his money without responding, but Tyler continued. "My buddy got a tattoo just like that after watching some Navy SEAL movie. Pretty cool how you can just walk into a tattoo parlor and come out looking like a hero, right?" The comment stung more than Marcus expected. Not because it was particularly cruel, but because it represented a disconnect he'd encountered since leaving the service. People saw the external markers, the tattoos, the bearing, the way veterans carried themselves, but had no understanding of what those symbols actually meant. "Have a good day," Marcus said simply, taking his groceries and walking toward the exit. "Hey man, no offense," Tyler called after him. "I'm sure you served honorably in the supply depot or wherever." Marcus paused at the door but didn't turn around. Getting into an argument with a teenager who didn't know any better wouldn't solve anything. He'd learned long ago to pick his battles, and this wasn't one worth fighting. Outside the store, he encountered Mrs. Henderson, his elderly neighbor from childhood. She was struggling with her own grocery bags, and Marcus immediately stepped forward to help. "Oh, my goodness, Marcus!" she exclaimed. "I heard you were back in town. I'm so sorry about your father. He used to help me with my yard work, you know. Such a gentleman." "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. Let me carry these to your car." As they walked, she asked about his military service, but in a respectful way that showed genuine interest rather than skepticism. She thanked him for his service, a phrase that always made him slightly uncomfortable, but which he accepted graciously. "You know," she said, as he loaded her groceries into her trunk, "there are some people in this town who don't understand what real service means, but there are plenty of us who do. Your father was so proud of you, Marcus. He told anyone who would listen about his son, the Navy SEAL." The words touched him more than he expected. His father had been a man of few words, not given to emotional displays. Knowing that Tom Rodriguez had spoken proudly of his son's service meant everything to Marcus. That evening, Marcus sat on the porch of his childhood home, a modest two-bedroom house with a small front yard and a detached garage where he'd spent countless hours learning about engines and tools from his father. The neighborhood was quiet, with porch lights beginning to flicker on as darkness settled over Millbrook. He thought about the day's encounters and the casual dismissal of military service he'd witnessed. It wasn't anger he felt exactly, but rather a deep sadness about the growing divide between military and civilian communities. People like Tyler at the grocery store weren't necessarily bad people, but they lived in a world completely separate from the realities of military life. His phone buzzed with a text from his former team leader, Commander James Harrison, who was now stationed at a base 3 hours away. The message was simple. "Heard about your father. If you need anything, let me know. The team sends their regards." Marcus smiled at the message. These were the people who truly understood the weight of service, the meaning behind the tattoos, the bonds forged in training and tested in combat. They were his real family now, scattered across the country and around the world, but connected by shared experiences that civilians could never fully grasp. Tomorrow would bring his father's funeral, and Marcus knew he would have to face more of the same casual disrespect and misunderstanding he'd encountered today. But he also knew there would be people like Mrs. Henderson who understood and appreciated the sacrifice involved in military service. As he prepared for bed in his old room, Marcus looked at himself in the mirror. The tattoo on his shoulder was clearly visible. The Navy SEAL trident that had cost him 3 years of the most demanding training imaginable, followed by nearly a decade of deployments to some of the world's most dangerous places. It wasn't just ink on skin. It was a symbol of dedication, sacrifice, and brotherhood that most people would never understand. But tomorrow, something unexpected would happen that would change how at least a few people in Millbrook viewed military service. Marcus had no way of knowing that Commander Harrison's message was about more than condolences. His former commanding officer had been planning to attend the funeral as a surprise, a gesture of respect for a fallen teammate's father. The stage was set for a moment that would challenge assumptions and reveal truths about honor, service, and the real meaning of the symbols that warriors carry with them long after their battles are over. The morning of the funeral dawned gray and overcast, matching Marcus's somber mood as he prepared for the service. He selected his only suit, a black one he'd purchased years ago for formal military functions, and carefully knotted his tie. Looking in the mirror, he made sure his tattoo was completely covered by his dress shirt and jacket. Today wasn't about him or his service. It was about honoring his father's memory. The funeral home was fuller than he'd expected when he arrived an hour early. Word had spread through the small town about Tom Rodriguez's passing, and people had come to pay their respects to a man who had been a quiet pillar of the community for 4 decades. Marcus shook hands with former co-workers of his father, neighbors and family friends who shared stories about Tom's kindness and reliability. "Your father helped my son get that job at the factory," one elderly man told Marcus. "Never asked for anything in return. Just saw a young man who needed a chance. He fixed my car for free when I couldn't afford to pay," added a woman Marcus didn't recognize. "Said he remembered what it was like to struggle with young kids." These stories painted a picture of his father that Marcus treasured. Tom Rodriguez hadn't been a man who sought recognition or praise, but his quiet acts of kindness had touched many lives in Millbrook. As the service time approached, Marcus noticed Tyler from the grocery store entering with what appeared to be his parents. The young man looked uncomfortable in an ill-fitting dress shirt and tie, clearly attending out of obligation rather than genuine respect. When their eyes met, Tyler looked away quickly, perhaps remembering his mocking comments from the day before. The three men from the diner were also in attendance, along with their families. Marcus overheard one of them commenting to another, "Tom was a good guy, even if his kid thinks he's some kind of war hero." Marcus clenched his jaw but said nothing. This was neither the time nor the place for confrontations. He found his seat in the front row next to his Aunt Maria and Uncle Roberto, who had driven down from Chicago for the service. Reverend Patterson, who had baptized Marcus as a baby, delivered a heartfelt eulogy about Tom Rodriguez's life. He spoke about a man who had immigrated to America as a young adult, worked hard to provide for his family, and raised a son to serve his country with honor. The Reverend's words were simple but powerful, focusing on the values that had defined Tom's life: integrity, hard work, and love for his community. During the service, Marcus noticed people glancing at him with curiosity. Some looked at him with respect and understanding, particularly the older veterans in attendance who recognized something in his bearing and demeanor. Others seemed skeptical, perhaps influenced by the gossip and assumptions that often circulated in small towns about returning soldiers. After the service, as people filed out toward the cemetery for the burial, Marcus overheard more whispered conversations. Some were positive, remembering his father fondly and expressing sympathy for Marcus's loss. But others carried the same undercurrent of doubt and skepticism he'd encountered since returning to town. "I heard he claims he was some kind of special forces," one woman whispered to another. "My nephew was in the army, and he says most of these guys exaggerate their service." "The quiet ones are usually the phonies," her companion replied. "Real warriors don't need to advertise it with tattoos and military haircuts." Marcus felt the familiar weight of misunderstanding settling on his shoulders. He'd faced enemy fire, lost teammates, and carried the psychological scars of combat. Yet here in his hometown, his service was being questioned by people who had never worn a uniform. At the graveside, the small gathering huddled together against the cool autumn wind. Reverend Patterson said final prayers as Tom Rodriguez's casket was lowered into the ground. Marcus threw a handful of dirt onto the casket, saying his own silent goodbye to the man who had taught him the importance of quiet strength and unwavering integrity. As the crowd began to disperse, Marcus noticed an unfamiliar vehicle pulling into the cemetery parking area. It was a black sedan with government plates, moving with the purposeful precision of an official vehicle. He didn't think much of it at first, assuming it might be a late arrival or cemetery staff, but then the car doors opened, and Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. Commander James Harrison stepped out of the passenger side, resplendent in his Navy dress blues. The commander was an imposing figure even in civilian settings, but in full military dress uniform, he commanded immediate attention and respect. Behind him emerged two other men Marcus recognized, Master Chief Petty Officer David Tank Thompson and Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell. They too were in dress blues, their uniforms pristine and their bearing unmistakably military. The sight of his former teammates at his father's funeral was both unexpected and deeply moving. The effect on the crowd was immediate and dramatic. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as people turned to stare at the approaching military personnel. These weren't actors from a movie or weekend warriors playing dress-up. These were clearly active-duty military officers, their uniforms authentic down to the smallest detail, their posture and movement speaking of years of professional service. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by the gesture his former teammates had made. They had driven 3 hours to honor his father's memory, taking time from their demanding schedules to support a brother in arms during his time of grief. Commander Harrison approached Marcus with measured steps, his expression serious and respectful. The crowd watched in complete silence as the two men faced each other next to Tom Rodriguez's grave. Tyler from the grocery store stood with his mouth slightly open, his earlier mockery forgotten in the face of this display of military protocol and respect. The three men from the diner had gone completely silent, their casual dismissal of military service suddenly seeming petty and inappropriate. "Rodriguez!" Commander Harrison said in his command voice, which carried clearly across the quiet cemetery. "I'm sorry for your loss. Your father raised a fine sailor and an exceptional SEAL. It was an honor to serve with you, and it's an honor to be here today." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The crowd processed what they had just heard. This imposing military commander had not only confirmed Marcus's service, but had specifically mentioned the Navy SEALs, one of the most elite and respected units in the American military. Master Chief Thompson stepped forward next, his massive frame even more intimidating in dress blues. "Tom Rodriguez raised a warrior," he said simply. "Any father would be proud to have a son like Marcus." Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, her uniform adorned with ribbons that spoke of significant service, added her own words. "Marcus saved lives during our deployments. His father's values were evident in every mission we ran together." The three officers then performed a gesture that left the entire crowd speechless. In perfect unison, they came to attention and rendered a crisp military salute to Marcus. It was a display of respect between warriors, acknowledging shared sacrifice and mutual honor. Marcus, despite being in civilian clothes, instinctively returned the salute with the precision that had been drilled into him through years of training. For a moment, the cemetery was transformed into a military setting where protocols and traditions that civilians rarely witnessed were being observed with perfect dignity. The silence that followed was profound. Tyler looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. The three men from the diner stood rigid, their earlier mockery now seeming not just wrong but actively shameful. Other members of the crowd began to understand that they had been in the presence of a genuine American hero without realizing it. Mrs. Henderson, who had always treated Marcus with respect, now looked at him with something approaching awe. She had known he was a veteran, but she was beginning to understand that his service had been far more significant than she had imagined. Commander Harrison broke the silence by turning to address the crowd. His command presence was unmistakable as he spoke in the clear, authoritative voice that had led men into combat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "you have among you a man who served his country with exceptional distinction. Marcus Rodriguez completed 3 combat deployments with SEAL Team 6. He participated in classified operations that I cannot discuss, but I can tell you that his actions saved American lives and protected our national security." The impact of these words was visible on every face in the crowd. SEAL Team 6 was a designation that even civilians recognized as representing the absolute elite of military special operations. This wasn't just any veteran. This was a member of the same unit that had conducted some of the most important and dangerous missions in recent military history. His father, the commander continued, should be remembered not only for his own contributions to this community, but for raising a son who answered his country's call and served with honor in the most demanding circumstances imaginable. Tyler's face had gone pale, and he was staring at Marcus with a mixture of shame and amazement. The casual disrespect he had shown the day before now seemed not just rude, but actively offensive to a man who had risked his life for his country. The three men from the diner looked equally uncomfortable. Their assumption that Marcus was just another wannabe warrior playing dress-up had been thoroughly and publicly disproven by people whose authority on military matters was unquestionable. The transformation in the crowd's demeanor was immediate and profound. What had begun as a small-town funeral had become an impromptu ceremony honoring not just Tom Rodriguez, but also his son's extraordinary military service. People who had been whispering doubts and spreading skepticism now found themselves confronted with indisputable evidence of Marcus's genuine heroism. Commander Harrison continued his address, his voice carrying the authority that comes from leading elite warriors in the most dangerous situations imaginable. Marcus Rodriguez earned his trident through the most demanding military training in the world. Less than 25% of candidates complete Navy SEAL training. Marcus not only completed it, but excelled throughout his service. The commander's words had a visible impact on everyone present. Tyler from the grocery store looked like he was fighting back tears, clearly overwhelmed by the realization of how badly he had misjudged and disrespected a genuine American hero. His parents, standing beside him, placed supportive hands on his shoulders as they watched their son grapple with the magnitude of his mistake. Master Chief Thompson stepped forward to add his own testimony. "I've served with a lot of warriors over my 20-year career," he said, his voice gruff but filled with emotion. "Marcus Rodriguez is in the top 1% of operators I've had the privilege to work alongside. When things got dangerous, when lives were on the line, Marcus was the guy you wanted covering your back." The crowd hung on every word. These weren't empty platitudes or exaggerated praise. They were hearing first-hand accounts from elite military personnel about someone they had dismissed as a fraud or show-off. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming for many of them. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell shared her own perspective. "Marcus received the Navy Cross for actions during a classified operation that I cannot detail. What I can tell you is that his courage under fire saved the lives of civilians and fellow service members. The tattoo you see on his shoulder was earned through blood, sweat, and sacrifice that most people cannot imagine." At the mention of his tattoo, several people in the crowd glanced at Marcus with new understanding. What they had seen as a fashion statement or attempt to appear tough was actually a symbol of verified heroism and elite military achievement. Marcus stood quietly through these testimonials, clearly moved by his teammates' gesture, but also somewhat uncomfortable with the public attention. His training had emphasized humility and quiet professionalism, not public recognition or praise. But he understood that this moment was about more than him. It was about honoring his father's memory and perhaps educating his hometown about the reality of military service. After the formal testimonials concluded, Commander Harrison approached Marcus for a private conversation, while the crowd watched respectfully from a distance. Their voices were too low to be overheard, but their body language spoke of deep mutual respect and the bond shared by warriors who have faced danger together. "Your father would be proud of the man you became," Harrison told Marcus quietly. "And he'd be proud of how you've handled yourself since coming home. It takes strength to endure ignorance with dignity." "Thank you for coming, sir," Marcus replied. "This means more than I can express." "We take care of our own," Harrison said simply. "Always." As the military personnel prepared to depart, they took time to speak with members of the crowd. Their presence transformed what could have been an awkward situation into an educational opportunity. People who had never interacted with genuine military heroes found themselves asking respectful questions about military service and gaining new appreciation for the sacrifices made by their fellow citizens. Tyler approached Marcus hesitantly, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Sir," he began, his voice shaking slightly, "I owe you a huge apology. What I said yesterday was completely out of line. I had no idea. I should never have said those things regardless. But I really didn't understand." Marcus placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. Apology accepted, Tyler. You're young and you're learning. The important thing is that you recognize when you've made a mistake and you're willing to own it. Is there anything I can do to make it right? Tyler asked earnestly. Just remember this feeling the next time you're tempted to judge someone you don't know, Marcus replied gently. And maybe think about ways you can serve your community or country. Service doesn't have to be military. There are lots of ways to make a difference. The three men from the diner approached next, looking deeply ashamed of their earlier comments. The apparent leader of the group, a middle-aged man named Bob Henley, spoke for all of them. Marcus, we owe you an apology and our thanks. We said some things that were completely out of line, especially about Veterans Day and people who claim military service. We had no right to speak that way about any veteran, but especially not about someone who served with such distinction. We let ignorance and cynicism cloud our judgment, added another. Seeing your teammates here today, hearing what they had to say about your service, it puts things in perspective. Marcus accepted their apologies with grace, understanding that their misconceptions came from ignorance rather than malice. The important thing is that we're having this conversation now, he said. Maybe this helps all of us understand each other better. As the afternoon progressed, the gathering naturally evolved into an informal reception where people shared stories about Tom Rodriguez and asked respectful questions about military service. Commander Harrison and his teammates patiently answered questions about SEAL training, deployment life, and the reality of military service, helping to bridge the gap between civilian and military communities. Mrs. Henderson approached Marcus with tears in her eyes. Your father used to tell me stories about your letters from overseas, but he never shared details about how dangerous your work was. I think he was protecting us from worry, but also protecting your privacy. Now I understand why he was so proud, but also why he worried so much. Dad understood the importance of operational security, Marcus explained. But yes, he worried. Every military parent does. It's part of the sacrifice that families make. The conversation turned to broader topics about military families, the challenges of deployment, and the difficulty of transitioning back to civilian life. Many people in the crowd admitted they had never really considered these aspects of military service, focusing only on the glory or heroism without understanding the full human cost. One elderly veteran from the Korean War approached Marcus with deep emotion. Son, I served in Korea 60 years ago, and I've watched how this country has treated its warriors over the decades. Sometimes we've honored them properly, sometimes we haven't. Today, seeing your teammates honor you and your father, seeing this community learn what real service looks like, it gives me hope. As the sun began to set, Commander Harrison and his team prepared to make the drive back to their base. Before departing, they performed one final gesture that left a lasting impression on everyone present. They presented Marcus with a folded American flag, explaining that it had flown over their base headquarters in his honor. This flag represents the gratitude of your teammates and the entire SEAL community, Commander Harrison said. Your father raised a warrior, and warriors never really retire. You'll always be one of us. The ceremony concluded with the three officers rendering a final salute to Marcus before departing. As their vehicle pulled away from the cemetery, the crowd remained largely silent, processing what they had witnessed. In the days that followed, word spread throughout Millbrook about what had happened at Tom Rodriguez's funeral. The story grew in the telling, but the core facts remained unchanged. A local man who had been dismissed and mocked had been revealed as a genuine American hero through the testimony of his former commanding officers. Tyler at the grocery store made a point of thanking Marcus for his service every time he saw him, but more importantly, he began volunteering with local veterans organizations. The three men from the diner became advocates for better treatment of returning veterans, using their own experience of misjudgment as a teaching tool for others. The upcoming Veterans Day ceremony took on new significance for the town. Marcus was asked to speak at the event, sharing his insights about military service and the importance of supporting veterans. His message was one of understanding rather than judgment, encouraging the community to learn about military service rather than making assumptions. Mrs. Henderson organized a neighborhood effort to maintain the grave of Tom Rodriguez, ensuring that flowers were always present to honor both the father and the son who had served their country. The simple headstone became a quiet symbol of the connection between military families and their communities. For Marcus, the experience reinforced lessons he had learned during his military service about the importance of quiet dignity in the face of misunderstanding. His teammates' gesture had not only honored his father's memory, but had also provided a powerful lesson for his hometown about the reality of military service. The tattoo on his shoulder remained covered most of the time, not out of shame, but out of the same humility that had always characterized his approach to his service. He understood that symbols and recognition were less important than the quiet satisfaction of having served with honor and the continuing bonds with teammates who understood the true meaning of service. The incident at the cemetery became a turning point for Millbrook's relationship with its veterans. What began as skepticism and casual disrespect evolved into genuine appreciation and support. The town learned that heroes often walk among us unrecognized, carrying their service quietly and without fanfare, waiting not for praise, but simply for understanding.